Welcome, gentle listener, I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and faces of the Warhammer 40K setting. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. I'll keep this intro brief. Like and subscribe, share if you're able, all of the usual. Alas, the Maelstrom expansion book is not a cohesive narrative, as are the 500 Worlds documents. Plus, I have been somewhat hampered in my recording and editing duties due to the addition of a new squig to my family home. Say hello to Merlin. Thus, I have been forced to break the reading of this Lair of the Tyrant book into multiple bites. My deep apologies. So, from the horse's mouth, to quote. Huron Blackheart, Master of the Red Corsairs. The piratical lord of the Maelstrom is known by many names. Within the Imperium, he was lauded as Luft Huron, and then cursed as the Tyrant of Badab. He is feared as the Blood Reaver and sworn fealty to as the Master of the Red Corsairs. Most know him as Huron Blackheart, a supreme raider whose piratical armadas terrorize the Maelstrom and beyond. The tyrannical warlord who would go on to rule the Maelstrom was once Luft Huron, the heretic who instigated the uprising known to history as the Badab War. He is named as the last chapter master of the Astral Clause in the expurgated volumes of the Angelus Mortis. Meanwhile, the codicils of Tharlak from the same period condemn him as an insane enemy of holy terror. In lurid detail, they chronicle his descent into tyranny. It is said he demanded authority over chapters in the region of the Astral Claw's home world, increased his planetary holdings and the scope of his warriors' remit, threatening loyal adepts of terror, and eventually withholding samples of his chapter's gene seed for evaluation. Few Imperial commanders, then or now, doubt Huron's fierce charisma and influence, talents he used to draw not only his chapter into treachery alongside him, but the warriors of 3 others as well. The Tharlakai historiators, however, dismiss the Badab insurrection as doomed from the start. They point to the eventual size of the Astral Claw's homeworld, and the driving of the heretic survivors into the Maelstrom as the logical consequences of heresy. Finally, they glorify what they describe as the undeniable account of Huron's fall, his inescapable execution by the Saint Siegebreaker of the Sar Phantoms. Yet the so-called Tyrant of Badab lived. Huron's survival is described by many Red Corsairs as a dark miracle, though never in his presence. Precisely who or what was responsible for this outcome is unclear. One side of his body had to be almost entirely reconstructed with bionic augmentations. Modifications would later be expanded to include the monstrously sized gauntlet known as the Tyrant's Claw. Lord Apothecary Garion and Forge Master Valthex are hailed by many as the architects of Huron's resurrection. Indeed, they both remain high in the Blood Reaver's favour when many former Astral Claws have fallen foul of his wrath. Others whisper Huron's life, and perhaps other gifts, were granted to him by demonic forces within the warp. Some say the Dark Gods themselves. The Master of the Red Corsairs does not deign to discuss such lurid claims with his underlings, but nor has he denied them. While he does not count the favour of the Dark Gods, Huron also does not suppress their worship by those in his service. Like Abaddon the Despoiler, he seeks to reap the rewards of the warp without ever becoming its pawn. All Huron demands is unwavering obedience whenever he requires it. At other times, he permits his followers relative latitude to reave and slay as they please. Attempts to exploit this seeming beneficence are crushed in ways that leave none any doubt to the limits of their autonomy. For instance, as he swiftly consolidated his power over what would become the Red Corsairs in the wake of his recovery, Huron ostentatiously eviscerated 3 powerful subordinates. These warriors had been with him in the final battles on Badab Primaris, but had become aspiring reeve lords whose ambitions had grown beyond their strength. None of Huron's servants know whether the flight from Badab Primaris was always fated to end in the Maelstrom, or if some sudden swell of the Gaia enveloped the refugees. Although star charts are useless in its depths, some of the astral claws and their navigators may have been able to draw upon experience when the chapter last fought within its bounds for the Imperium, at least giving them a sense of the manifold dangers they were diving headlong into. That there was death during this time is certain, from sudden warp tides, from power struggles as the war's losers sought to establish a new hierarchy. Despite damaged ships, despite evading pursuing vessels and attempting to steer a safe course through the Gaia's energies and debris, at least some survivors of the Badab War continued to endure. They did so without Huron's leadership, for it was 8 ship days before he could speak following the endeavor to save his life. Many years later, mortal cults would whisper that he steered the survivors to safety through his dreams. But if Huron dreamed at all in his fugue state between life and death, they were visions of plundered wealth, conquest, dominion, and revenge against the empire that had wronged him. During the early part of their new existence within the Maelstrom, Huron's limited forces were still significant enough to quickly overwhelm the first pirate stronghold he found, slaughtering nearly all in a matter of hours. The survivors swore allegiance to the Tyrant and became his slaves, soon learning to fear his fury. What at first could be said to have been an act of survival, of warning away other, as yet unseen threats with a show of strength upon those within reach, soon became the seed of greater and darker dreams. Terror, he realized, was riddled not only with fear of him, but with envy. With more ships and warriors, Blackheart could again build an empire worthy of his rule. And now, he could do so in a realm from which the Imperium could not easily dislodge him. The Hamadryar. In the wake of Huron's recovery in the Maelstrom and his consolidation over what would become the Red Corsairs, his steps became dogged by a strange creature. Huron calls this entity the Hamadryar, but no one knows what it truly is. That it has a connection to the warp is undoubted. At times, it slinks at Huron's heels, flicking into existence upon his shoulders, or squirms from the shadows cast by those who have displeased him. Some call it a genuine demon, one of the countless horrors born of the warp. Others are sure it is a form of neuroempathic Xenos. Garlon harbors a suspicion that it is a manifestation of the Maelstrom itself, part guide and part parasite, ensuring Huron thrives but never strays far from the maddening tides of its origin. Ruling the Maelstrom. Since that first slaughter of pirates and his subsequent enslavement of other denizens of the Maelstrom, Huron's infamy and power have swelled. He ultimately seeks to master the region completely, but a territory that is so turbulent and huge is surely beyond even his iron rule. It is one thing for an armored transhuman killing machine to dominate a human deserter or alien marauder in person. It is quite another to extend that influence across an expansive, contorted region such as the Maelstrom, with its shifting and hazardous warp routes and innumerable hiding places and ambush sites. Whilst the Red Corsairs are the largest coherent force within the Maelstrom, they are but specks amidst the rising Gaia. Keeping all the other piratical, mercenary, or instinctively predatory groups in check with these comparatively few warriors, and ensuring such warriors remain loyal across the Maelstrom, would be impossible for any lesser ruler. Huron's success is forged from the breadth of his talents. He wields ruthlessness, personal strength, naval power, adaptable tactical insight, and a gift for leveraging the obsessions and skills of those who serve him. Blackheart's permissive rule sees the raiders and subfleets that serve him free to hunt at whim, and even carve out small territories within the Maelstrom, which they viciously defend from other pirates. He also deigns to tolerate other enclaves, ruled by those who have not sworn allegiance to him, but whose presence benefits the Red Corsairs in some way. The Hellforge of Galmech, overseen by the Wordbearers, for example, has reciprocal contracts with Huron, supplying him with warp-infused mechanisms in return for raw materials and fresh converts. These activities ultimately serve Huron. Constant conflict serves to weed out raiders who are too weak, as well as commanders who cannot survive rivals. Their attacks under his banner cow much smaller warbands yet to swear fealty to him. The loot Huron's warband sees is also subject to irregular and unannounced ties to his own coffers. The penalties for failing to swiftly supply what Blackheart demands are dire, and so his scattered warriors are driven by threat as well as their own greed. Huron is not above making allies of convenience with many of the Xenos warbands that reeve throughout the Maelstrom. At times, he has employed mercenary bands of Kroot and bought the services of roving Tamask. It is a widely propagated story amongst the Red Corsairs that he has sometimes traded Space Marine captives, prisoners captured during raids, and errant Red Corsairs alike with Dukari, their terror raids paid for in transhuman flesh. Most Orc pirate captains are threats to Huron's fleet, but more than one warband of freebooters has been persuaded to strike at carefully chosen targets to further Huron's plans. On more than one occasion, Huron has evidenced to his underlings a strange connection with the Maelstrom. He is said to be able to sense when his ship is passing its borders or moving from one cursed region within it to another. He has perceived the empiric waves of prey vessels, directed his raiders onto ideal intercept vectors, and foreseen catastrophic tides that could have wrecked his priceless naval power. Some Red Corsairs see these talents as extensions of other gifts, often associated with the Hamadryah, the skittering familiar that attends Huron. These esoteric abilities make the Blood Reaver and his raiding parties the undisputed terrors of worlds within the Maelstrom. They have enabled the Red Corsairs to slip back into depths after raiding much further afield, while any pursuers are often dashed into oblivion by sudden warp tempests. What success Huron has achieved is undoubtedly incredible, and the cutthroat realm he has hammered into existence is formidable. Yet, to claim mastery over the Maelstrom, a title oft repeated by his servants, is akin to announcing dominion over raging wildfire. The infernal gyre cannot be tamed or controlled. Its border cannot be hemmed, its tides cannot be mapped, nor can the planets or warp routes located one day be assured to be there the next. What warriors and ships Huron can call upon from his Red Corsairs are vastly outnumbered by the Maelstrom's other denizens. Huron's mastery is in knowing all of this, in turning it to his advantage where he can, and evading the Maelstrom's insanity and dangers where they threaten his power. Thus, Blackheart has navigated a narrow path between catastrophe on one side and damnation on the other, with the potential for greater power, glory, and renown leading him on as an elusive prize. It remains to be seen whether he will reach some point of no return. He is, of course, already damned 1,000 times in the eyes of Terra's High Lords, but there are worse fates in the galaxy than to be condemned by the Imperium and hunted by its armies. There are many that say that day passed long ago. Garreon the Corpsemaster, Lord Apothecary of the Red Corsairs. Garion is a sickeningly eager battle surgeon and an unfailingly loyal follower of Huron. Once hauling Blackheart's body back to life, it is said by the corpse-maker's foes that in that act he cursed the galaxy with his gruesome skills, talents he has deepened with avid obsession. The secrets of the dead and the dying form the realm of Garrion's macabre expertise. His unsettling knowledge has been harvested from thousands of battlefield subjects and his numerous gore-spattered hideouts across the Maelstrom. In battle, the Lord Apothecary is keen to witness the effects of all traumas, seeking to unpick the mysteries between living and dead flesh, and make himself the master of the barrier between the two. He is not above inflicting lethal torments himself, or carving open a living foe purely to examine the last pulsating quivers of their organs. Nor is it only the enemy that needs to fear the embrace of the Corpsemaster's vivispector's array. With a leering grin, Garion gladly descends upon mortally wounded Red Corsairs as well, Occasionally, he can excruciatingly revive those who have suffered even horrendous injuries. All too often, however, those on whom he works with grafted peelers, chem injectors, bone splicers, and other implements are reduced to a grisly wreck. Stowing the choicest morsels in cryo canisters for later examination, the Lord Apothecary swiftly moves on to his next patient, sometimes offering a cranial shot from his Absolver bolt pistol as a parting salute. Garion was the senior apothecary of the Astral Claws. He is one of the few former battle brothers of Badab to have survived the catastrophic disaster of the uprising and, in the years since, to have remained in Huron's favour. Most believe this to be in no small part thanks to his pivotal role in rebuilding Huron's melted flesh and saving his life. Yet those who know Huron better know his soul has no room for gratitude or sentimentality. In truth, Garion's use is far more than as a mere sawbones. The Lord Apothecary is responsible for overseeing the Red Corsairs' biological survival. He screens potential recruits for mutation and instability, and hungrily looks for new strengths or stranger traits within their varying lineages to add to his store of genetic knowledge. The Tyrant of Badab tacitly condones that a portion of newly heretical inductees frequently vanish while in Garion's custody, never to fight in Huron's service. He tolerates the Corpsemaster's enthusiastic vivisection and gene manipulation as long as most of the Red Corsairs are fit to obey him. Garion also husbands the dwindling reserves of the Astral Claw's gene seed and harvests sources from battlefields and prisoners to forge new Red Corsairs from aspirant youths. Even before the Badab War, Garion was lauded for his insight and understanding of Space Marine physiology. His advice was sought by apothecaries of other loyalist chapters, and even Magi Biologists and generators of nearby Forge worlds. Before the Astral Claw's gene seed tithe faltered, he was credited for his battle brother's genetic resilience. It was only after Huron ordered a halt to sending samples for imperial scrutiny that claims came to light of anomalous degradation redolent of forbidden practices of genetic manipulation. Since then, Garion's morbid interests have been focused on desperately trying to make the best of the imperfect material available to him. Huron's demands for new transhuman raiders are constant. Garrion knows whatever favor he holds in Blackheart's eyes will not protect him if he cannot maintain the supply. Bloody legacies. The threats and obstacles to Garion's success are numerous and dire, but the Red Corsairs are better equipped than most to meet them. They at least have the numbers and ships to hunt down and steal esoteric biomaterials and tools needed for their complex surgeries, supplies which loyalist chapters either manufacture for themselves or have reliable treaties with local forge worlds to supply. The Imperium's chapters have ancient rights to worlds from which they recruit new aspirants, something traitors must seize anew. Loyalists also have the infrastructure to ensure their apothecaries are all ritually trained in the surgical and genetic practices their calling requires. The varied origins of a warband's warriors may bring an injection of fresh skills, but they also bring new problems. Space Marines of different genetic lineages have very different biochemical needs or deficiencies, which a warband's amateur chirurgeons are unequipped to deal with. It is no wonder, then, that some renegades are forced to seek the services of mercenary dealers in arcane surgery, such as those within the Dark Mechanicum, figures such as Fabius Bile or Garion, or even have to resort to treating with Xenos or sorcerers. As the most infamous and powerful band in the Maelstrom, the Red Corsairs attract many heretics who have abandoned their chapters and strayed into their territory. Lesser warbands are not so lucky, often slowly shrinking in numbers until they can no longer survive more than minor raids. Most vanish, their corpses and assets picked over by their killers. Others are simply subsumed into their conquerors' ranks. Katar Garrix, the Headsman. Where other reavers seek renown, ships, weapons, or esoteric resources as the prizes of their piracy, Katar Garrix is an executioner whose simple drive is to take heads. He cares little about whose or what's neck he severs them from. only that they end with unmistakable finality. The headsman is a cold-hearted murderer who has killed for Huron since the days of the Badab War. He possesses immense strength and skill that enable him to wield his two-handed power axe with a deftness at odds with its size. With it, he has beheaded loyalist imperial officers, highly skilled or ferocious Xenos warlords, and champions of the Dark Guards. To Garrix falls the responsibility of lopping the heads from the enemy army. At times, he has led strike forces of Red Corsairs that targeted stratagem command posts or communication arrays. The executioner has even instigated the severing of reinforcement routes by direct bombardment, or else choking or bleeding them by throwing massed mobs of mortal followers into their path. Although Garrix's tactical competency is adept for such missions, it is the besting of the foe's champions in savage acts of butchery and bloodshed in which he truly excels. Garrix was once a battle brother of the Executioner's chapter. Though he followed the surviving traitors in their flight, it was not through loyalty to Huron, fervent belief in the heretic's cause, or even hatred of the Imperium. The opportunity to wet his blade with the blood of worthy opponents again and again is all he had come to relish. In the traitors, he saw a brotherhood uncosseted by imperial dogma, who could gift him with limitless prey. In the years since, it has become a feverish obsession that cannot be sated for long. Huron sees that there is always a neck ready for his axe. Garrix is a valuable tool for Blackheart, an amoral killer with a commendable lack of introspection. The mere threat of him arriving unannounced upon the bridge of some overambitious reeve captain, Garrick's followers already having secured all the means of escape, keeps many Red Corsairs in line. Huron knows that his headsman's loyalties endure only so long as the master of the Maelstrom shows strength and provides a steady stream of victims for the acts of ending. It is frequent, therefore, for Garrix to accompany Huron on all of his master's vicious raids, or to be given limited commands of his own, while Huron has less violent matters to attend to. His master knows Garrix will wield his axe for whoever gives him the greatest opportunity to swing it. Huron would likely be the first to feel its bite, if he ever fell, in the headsman's estimation. Disloyalty's reward. Fealty within the Maelstrom would seem a paradox to many who have had but the briefest dealings with its denizens. Treachery, betrayal, and double-dealing are the watchwords most of the region's inhabitants live by. Even amongst the Red Corsairs, loyalty is not something to be treasured, honored, or even earned. It is an asset, and like all assets to these reavers, it is taken where it is of use, or defiled where it serves the enemy. Huron's power base is built upon warbands of traitors with countless origins. The Red Corsairs cannot rely on the brotherhood and shared genetic heritage that binds loyalist chapters. Strength and skill in battle, ruthlessness and viciousness are all traits grudgingly respected by the Red Corsairs in their commanders. Those who serve well expect opportunities to indulge their obsessions. This might be to slay in the first wave of the bloody sporting action, or to take the head of particular foe whose existence grates upon a warrior's soul, to seize power and glory by murdering their way up the ranks, or any other of several manias, delusions, and dark passions. When such warriors fail in the sometimes arbitrary expectations of their commander or peers, the results are typically fatal for one side or the other. Huron cares little about the deeds of individual Red Corsairs, and far less about the fate of his human and alien thralls. He ensures that his commanders, however, are seen by all to receive their deserved reward. Garrix is Huron's preeminent executioner, his axe reserved for the most high-ranking failures. His presence during stratagem parleys in trophy-hung ships' bridges is seen by inexperienced pirate lords as ceremonial. Until, that is, the moment Huron gives a minimal gesture towards the object of his displeasure. In an instant, the headsman storms over hololith tables or overturns tactical displays, trampling serfs too slow to flee from his path, and bludgeoning aside unworthy bodyguards to hack the offending reaver's head off in a spray of blood and ceramite splinters. Such acts do more than hypo-indoctrinated obedience sermons at reinforcing Blackheart's authority. Huron is served by many lesser executioners, honoured to take the skulls of those not even fit to receive a personal sentence from the Tyrant. Some of these operate clandestinely, serving as a line warrior amidst the warband of one whose actions are under consideration. When the time is right, they will deliver Blackheart's verdict, often in as mundane or as unseen a way as possible, without even the spectacle many Red Corsairs have come to expect of the Maelstrom's rough justice. Such is the fate of the lowly failures, to die anonymously and with as little acknowledgement as possible. Acts of ending. Practical and unimaginative, Garrix does not care to name his tool of murder. Some Red Corsairs, however, have grimly called his enormous executioner's blade the axe of ending, not only for the lives it cuts short, but also for its cauterizing of any further betrayal. When activated, its blade is wreathed in a ferociously violent disruptor field. This energy tears open armor and flesh on contact, to leave horrific wounds that are more like gaping bloody crevasses than cuts. Garlon Souleater, the Tyrant's Witch. Among the many psychers in Huron's inner circles, none are as powerful, subtle, or unreadable as Garlon Souleater. He is a master manipulator and a devastating sorcerer, and he grants his empiric insights on the arcane and malefic to further the Red Corsairs' masterful raids. Galan is a former librarian of the Mantis Warriors, and one of the traitors who fled with Huron into the Maelstrom rather than face imperial judgment. He is Huron's principal conduit with the warp. When the Red Corsairs are hunting psychically saturated artifacts, it is Galan that a wise Reaver captain turns to track its spoor or warn of its danger. On raids where prey fight back with empiric technology or sorcery, it is Galan who outmaneuvers them with his witchery or unpicks their spells with his psychic hood. Should the malefic entities of the warp need to be treated with, cajoled or dominated, Galan is Huron's mouthpiece in the Imperium, yet he is more dangerous by far than a mere auspicator of the Infernal. Souleater possesses, or perhaps projects, the deep and sonorous voice of a born orator, but his most dangerous tool is his mind. He is a cruel and manipulative spy master, and Huron's primary provider of enemy intelligence. He can ferret out the disloyal amongst Blackheart's pirates, exploit obsessions to instigate mutinies against disfavored lieutenants, and tool prisoners' skulls for defense network vulnerabilities. Garland can reach into the consciousness of the foe and twist them like a master puppeteer. At Dolorous Reef, he dominated the gunnery crews on Imperial warships, causing them to fire on their own allies. On Yevnek Beta, he implanted murderous treachery into the minds of the Astra Militarum garrison. 3 officers had their throats cut, and the resulting lengthy purge and regimental dismantling so weakened the defences that they subsequently fell to the Red Corsairs in a week. It is whispered amongst the most incautious, those newly oathed to Huron's service, that no Red Corsair has ever seen Garlon Souleater's face. That is untrue, but it serves the sorcerer's purposes to have others never quite know who or what they are dealing with, as well as never knowing the full substance of his many schemes. It has, however, been many years since Garlon last removed his helm. Others amongst Huron's aides believe he no longer can, though whether it is because of rampant mutation having permanently fused him with his armor, or some even darker fate, none of them know. Empiric insights. Based as they are within a warp real space interstice, the Red Corsairs must constantly resist the corruption of the Empyrean. Renegades in such a region must contend with the subtle twisting of perceptions or spreading mutation, and much swifter threats such as attacks by demons. The shifting tides of the warp and the psychic abilities of rivals, or those hunting them, pose a threat that even a heretic Space Marine's transhuman physiology cannot combat. Successful warbands frequently include sorcerers to interpret and guard against such threats. Like Garlon, these may be former librarians. Others are warriors mutated by the warp with strange gifts or bearing boons of the dark gods. Some warbands cage cabals of mortal psychers, using them as sacrificial earthing rods or as unwilling hosts in which to capture demons to do their bidding. Captain Sargotta, commander of Reign of Spite. Wielding authority, power, and even the trust of Huron in quantities few of his transhuman servants can claim, Captain Sargotta is a hugely experienced fleet master, responsible for some of the Red Corsairs' most overwhelming victories in the sphere of void warfare. Captain Sargotta is a far greater shipmaster than any ragged pirate lord serving the master of the Maelstrom, all of whom she despises. She is also more capable in the art of void combat than most of Huron's renegade lords. While his reeve captains specialize in conducting planetary combat drops and boarding actions, it is Sargotta that Huron often turns to for expertise in fleet-level engagements. Few of Huron's transhuman warriors have experience in such strategies, and Sargotta's implanted neural augmentations enable her to pass spatial orbits and firing solutions as swiftly as many bridge cogitators. She masterminds interceptions of well-defended Imperial convoys, as well as planetary blockade strategies and Mandeville emergence strikes. Her long decades of hard-won experience as an Imperial officer amongst Battlefleet Solar have been honed to a bloodied razor's edge since she turned traitor and joined Huron's Reavers. Makala Urios Varnistra von Sargotta the 21st was born into an aristocratic dynasty of the Sol system, a lineage said to go back millennia to some of the greatest Saturnine Void Masters. As a result, Sargotta learned from an early age to negotiate the vicious politicking and assassinations of naval nobility. Though she rose steadily in seniority, it was not swift enough for her liking, and she became ever more active in seizing glory and victory at others' expense. Those she had wronged and thought to outmaneuver struck back at her while she was recuperating from fighting off heretic boarders who had almost seized her ship's bridge. These political and professional enemies took the opportunity to paint the boarding incident as an unforgivable failure. They cast her from ship command and out into some backwater in the Gorvilla subsector where the chances of power and authority would be nil. Mere months later, Gorvillis's naval headquarters at Skorand was invaded. Its commanders slaughtered and its ships and crews spirited away by pirates. Subsequent investigation showed Sargotta had transmitted the base's command codes to the raiders, leaving it vulnerable. The murder of thousands and the theft of billions of tons of material, what were later known as the Skorand infamy, were the final betrayals of her oaths as an Imperial officer. She has committed worse atrocities since. Though she now commands Reign of Spite, one of the most potent battleships in all of Huron's fleet, Sargotta's titles and responsibilities in his service extend far beyond the rule of a single vessel. She is his go-between with turncoat naval officers, supplying Huron with intelligence on coded signals, system vulnerabilities, and prospective betrayers amongst bridge officers whose ambition can be exploited. She is unafraid to speak her mind to Huron's reeve captains and other transhuman lieutenants on matters of void combat, at least when they are not aboard her ship. Sargotta has never abandoned the inflexible standards and arrogant pride of her origins and radiates a cold nobility despite the piratical trappings she wears. When the Red Corsairs strike at their prey, Captain Sargotta has been known to leave her bridge and accompany them in person. She glides into battle aboard a servo platform, the mizzen whale Deus. Its tentacular cables can be activated to parasitize the control systems of enemy ships, as well as the mechanisms of surface installations and the logic cores of war engines. Should enemies somehow cut their way through crews and guards, the captain draws her heavy power saber and ornate las pistol, ready to repel them with a sneer of imperious hatred twisting her features. Mastering the Void. The Red Corsair's strength is built upon its indomitable naval power, and Huron spends a lot of resources on maintaining and growing it. Captain Sargotta is amongst those whose expertise served Blackheart in identifying vessels and officers that will be of use to him. She assesses the competencies of Huron's other mortal shipmasters, and while her obsessive contempt for rivals has seen some killed at her hand, Blackheart sees such losses as a price worth her loyalty. These warships, often spread throughout the Red Corsair's fleets to serve in straightforward roles in their constant raids. At other times, Huron needs mass conveyor barges and troop transports to carry regiments of Militarum Traitoris or macro tankers to haul fuel. Merchant craft are targeted that can be fitted with hidden weapons or serve in roles such as fire ships. As disposable tonnage to be thrown at foes in fleet engagements or to be subtly added to a prey system's regular shipping, silently gathering data that would leave worlds vulnerable. More vessels are gifted to Huron's sometimes allies, payments for their contributions to the Red Corsair's raids, though there are tales of some harbouring repayments for betrayal in the form of a vortex mine. The Enforcer, Huron's prey taker. The Tyrian bounty hunter, known to the Red Corsairs as the Enforcer, is a dogged stalker and butcher of those who fail Huron and attempt to flee. She is also a brutal disciplinarian amongst his Xenos accomplices, ensuring their obedience through acts of exemplary violence. Among her own kind, the Enforcer possesses a name that translates into something approaching Cord 9 Sorga, a designation that references her species' intricate familial naming conventions. However, most Red Corsairs have neither capability nor inclination to pronounce the guttural and complex sounds required. Thus, the Enforcer has become known, almost mythologized, purely by her role in Huron service. It is a position she excels in. Blackheart's standards are exacting, and he does not give second chances, meaning that even formerly loyal lieutenants may rebel against him or flee if they believe that they have earned his ire. Should they escape, it risks broadcasting a message that betrayal has no consequences. The Enforcer ensures this never occurs. The mere mention of her title across a Maelstrom is enough to cow many pirates and mercenaries into quiescent submission to Huron's demands. Since rising into Huron's trust, the Enforcer has tracked down and mutilated lone marauders who merely spoke out against her master's excesses. She once sniffed out an entire piratical crew who had taken fuel and ammunition for one of Blackheart's caches. She stole aboard their vessel while they were in the midst of selling their loot, cracking open the outer hatches to explosively eject betrayers and black marketeers alike into the void. At Garvina's starfort, she caught up with Skolvan Sourmane, a bestial mutant whom the Enforcer had discovered was about to hand information on Blackheart's movements to an adept of the Inquisition. When she returned to Huron, she handed over the data slate Sourmane had stolen, along with his degloved hide. He was still alive when he was discovered in his own chamber. Besides tracking failures and cowards, the Enforcer is also Huron's eyes and ears, more often than not his mouth and his blade amongst the Red Corsair's numerous Xenos associates. Though she can converse with several species and use a stolen lingua vox coil with others, the Enforcer finds deeds are more efficient than words. For this reason, she is often accompanied by a creature almost no one living has seen beyond the Grendel stars of the galactic east. In her language, the Enforcer refers to the beast as plunder, though she is the only one who calls it anything at all. The creature is a Barghezi, perhaps an immature specimen, though not even the Enforcer knows for sure. She first encountered it 6 light years from Helix Beta, while on a mission to hunt down a smuggler who had crossed Huron. The Barghezi took her arm before she was able to subdue it with 2 shots from her Lontaxi Maimer. Since that day, the beast has been hers, taken as payment from her victim, along with a strange alien control mechanism she uses to suppress the worst of plunder's aggressive tendencies when they are not needed. It is said that Barghezi start as small as deck vermin, spreading along ship routes before growing in sudden and random cycles until they become enormous, when their legendary violence means a single one can wipe out an entire spaceport. The Enforcer has no intention of seeing that day, and sure as she is how long her looted control mechanism will work on the beast, one way or another, she intends to part ways with plunder when its threat to her life becomes too great. Except when she accompanies her master's raids into battle, it is rare for the Enforcer to do more than threaten the release of plunder. Thanks to a long mercenary career before swearing allegiance to Blackheart, she understands the value of rumor and knows how it spreads amongst warriors. The Enforcer was once one Xenos soldier amongst hundreds in the Ghetto Dozhurul. They were a Tyrelian war pack whose former masters, part of a broader pirate cartel, were slaughtered by Huron's Red Corsairs. Believing their masters dead, the Tyrelians gave their expansive pledges to Blackheart. Tyrelians value honor and oaths with a fanatical obsession. Thus, when the Ghetto Dozhurul later received summons from a few ragged survivors of their former employer's cartel, they moved to abandon Huron to fulfill what they saw as unfinished mercenary obligations. The Enforcer disagreed. She saw the slight to Huron Blackheart as the most egregious of insults, and the return to a failing cartel as weakness. She began to hunt them down. The war pack broke up, scattering to dozens of worlds, the soldiers joining other mercenary groups. Over many months she killed her former comrades one by one. When she was finished, she returned to Huron Blackheart, the heads of hundreds of other Tyrelians her tribute. Huron was swift to see the potential in such a loyal servant. The Enforcer has only hatred for humanity, and for other aliens little but disdain. Yet she respects the strength of Huron and his Red Corsairs. In his service, moreover, the Enforcer has risen far beyond what she could have achieved amongst her own kind. She has wealth and notoriety. She also has the opportunity to hunt, maim and kill those who spit upon honor, who defile the concept of oaths, and she has the privilege of picking over their corpses for choice trophies. She can ask no more of the harsh galaxy. Galmech, the Shrine of Iron. Deep within the Maelstrom lies the demon world of Galmech. It is amongst the most powerful and important strongholds of the Word-Bearers Traitor Legion, and a place of infernal industry where they fashion diabolic war machines, malevolent relics, and demon-possessed battleships. The Word-Bearers are one of the original traitor legions that followed War Master Horus into damnation 10,000 years ago. Of all those who fell during those dark days, they embraced the worship of the Chaos Gods first, and with the greatest fervor, and they have fought on in the name of their dread pantheon ever since. For the Word-Bearers, Galmech is second in importance only to the demon world of Sikaris within the Eye of Terror, where their demon Primarch Logar resides. Galmech is a planet of diabolic, continent-spanning cathedrals and heretical scriptoria, where teeming masses of mutant faithful offer desperate worship to the ruinous powers, and word-bearers and gibbering demons scribe tomes of lore and ritual. Zealous pilgrims face dangers beyond count to journey through to Galmech, guided by warp-sent visions and intent upon earning the fleeting regard of the dark gods. Beneath the nightmare frescoes of its twisted fanes, lunatics, outcasts, and heretics raise their voices in hymns that resonate through real space and the warp alike. Their devotion summons shoals of entities until the shadows writhe, and half-seen fiends prowl between the aisles of faithful, preying on those foolish enough to glance up as they pass. Galmech burns like a dark brand of fanatical power amidst the ever-shifting firmament of the Maelstrom. It is a warp focus of unimaginable power, and a base from which the Word-Bearers launch raid after raid within the Maelstrom and beyond its bounds. Over time, Galmech has become more than just a stronghold for the Word-Bearers' faith. Long ago, its ruling council of dark apostles and demonic aristocracy swore binding pacts with the tech magi of the Dark Mechanicum. So began the slow industrialization of Galmech. Infernal machinery sprout like parasitic accretions between the word-bearer's macrophanes, stretching tendrils of iron and brass into temples and towers. Miles-wide summoning circles were encased with titanic cages of binding engines and spirit pylons. Scaffolds climbed Galmech's stratospheric bell towers like iron creepers, the unnatural physics of the Maelstrom allowing the Dark Mechanicum to raise edifices of vertiginous design. Sweltering forge mazes burrow into the planet's bedrock, even as grotesque void docks spread their spars on high like hellish trees of such unimaginable size that they render the humans below to less than scurry insects. Blessed by the might of dark industry, Galmech has become a place where the word-bearer's faith is industrialized and weaponized on an apocalyptic scale. Heretic raiding ships come and go from its orbital docks in their hundreds, ancient legion cruisers and carriers rubbing shoulders with stolen imperial and alien vessels, piratical war barks, and mutated demon ships whose bizarre forms could not long survive beyond the succouring energies of the Maelstrom. In the entangled strata of towers, gantries, galleries, stairwells, prayer halls, libraries, and fanes below, the power of belief is channeled into every kind of monstrous war gear. Grimoires are penned by the hundred, their pages dripping with demonic invocations to draw the dark god's favor. Talismans, weapons, and scrimshawed bones by the million are imbued with supernatural energies, and relics of infernal warfare are shipped out in quantities to match the arms produced by an imperial forge world. Deeper still, upon and below the planet's scarred surface, machine spirits are tormented, and demon engines crafted by forge masters and chiromechs of the Dark Mechanicum, aided by renegade iron warriors and the best of the word-bearer's warpsmiths. Down here marched the Chaos Knights of Infernal House Shard, whose idolaters are trained by the tech magi of Galmech, and whose nobles style themselves as Templars of Lorgar's true faith. Meanwhile, at every level, word-bearers patrol, preach, and keep a stern watch upon the myriad mutants and mortals who willingly work themselves to death in the countless weapon fanes and munition shrines of this fume-wreathed demon world. The Glittering Void. Galmech orbits a cursed star, whose state flickers between searing brightness and negative shadow like some faulty lumen globe. Hundreds of moons swarm its surface, their surfaces inscribed with burning runes the size of cities. Demons are bound to many of these satellites. Their bloated forms are dug into the moons like ticks, their eyes watching tirelessly for intruders, while their wet and mumbling moors whisper all they see to conclaves of sorcerers in Galmech's sacred towers. Nor are they Galmech's only void defense. The planet lies at the heart of a glittering nebula of crystal shards, some as large as a void ship, others as small as a torn-off fingernail. This shroud rebuffs even the most potent augurs, preventing raiders from discovering the demon world, and parting only to permit passage to those who are welcome within the word-bearer's domain. Raid on the Crimson Eerie. Prince Yriel's Eldritch Raiders use webs of spies and contacts to locate profitable hunting grounds and vulnerable targets. It was via this expansive network of agents that he learned of a Red Corsairs raiding fleet en route to the void station known as Crimson Eerie. Their holds laden with plunder and prisoners seized from an ambushed Tokai fleet. A legendary period of dedicated surveillance, scouting and subterfuge had given Yriel a grasp of the Red Corsairs raiding force's composition and combat capability. Whilst Yriel had little doubt that his vessels were swifter and technologically superior to their opposition, they were far more fragile. This particular renegade flotilla was, by all accounts, large and formidable, and yet he was determined to punish the Red Corsairs for their savagery. Yriel felt any wound inflicted on his people keenly, and would not allow Huron's forces to go unpunished for their attack on the Tokai. Guiding his fleet to the fringes of the Tyrant's crown, Yriel had his ships linger at the outer edge of the Arak system, home to the Crimson Eerie. A system containing 3 uninhabitable worlds, all orbiting a sickly red dwarf star that pulsed constantly, emitting radiation waves that played havoc with even the Corsairs' advanced sensors. Yriel was confident, however, that the empiric perception of Karseth, his chief voyage dreamer, would prove acute enough to pierce the shroud of stellar energy. Indeed, it did not take long for the Ethermancer to sense the faint submolecular disturbances that heralded the warp translation of the Red Corsair flotilla, and for them to zero in on the throbbing energy signatures of the Renegade's engines. Yriel bade his helmsman follow Karseth's guidance and pursue their quarry towards the heart of the Arak system. As the Red Corsairs cruised towards the Crimson Eerie, Yriel snapped orders to his officers, dividing his fleet in 2. His lighter, faster ships would continue in pursuit, staying beyond Auspec's range and engaging hollow fields to avoid detection. They would wait until the foe had begun unloading their holds before launching a swift attack to draw Red Corsair vessels away from the station. Meanwhile, Yriel's flagship, Flame of Asuyan, and its companion dragon ship, Jade Chris, would make for the gravity well of the system's largest planet, staying well outside of Auspec's range. Doubtless that the Red Corsairs possessed esoteric measures of cutting through the system's sensor confounding conditions, Yriel intended to guide his dragon ships around the perimeter of the system, use the mass of its largest planet to mask his approach, and then use the world's gravity well to slingshot his ships towards the Crimson Eerie. It was a plan that may have succeeded fully were it not for the unexpected presence of a dreaded foe. Yriel's Gambit. Returning from a successful raid on the western fringes of the Maelstrom, Huron Blackheart had planned to pause only briefly at the Crimson Eerie, deposit a portion of his fleet's haul, and allow his warriors to indulge their varied obsessions within the station before proceeding to New Badab. Little did he expect to be so brazenly assailed in his own domain. His temporary flagship, the heavily modified strike cruiser, Tyranny Incarnate, had docked with the Void Station and begun refueling, rearmament and cargo transfer when the first peal of alarums erupted. Engine signatures had been detected, moving swiftly through the system's outer edge. As Tyranny Incarnate's crew rushed to battle stations, the bridge's hololith threat display flickered to life, projecting crackling red icons approaching the Crimson Eerie at high speed. The scarlet blips continued to flicker and shift position. Augurs struggled to track their movements accurately. Blackheart did not need his logic engines to confirm their identity as Aeldari. His bellowed orders echoed across the command deck when the first volley of pulsar beams impacted the vessel's hull. His crew reacted quickly, rushing to bring void shields and plasma drives online. Huron watched sleek Xenos vessels arrow straight through the bridge's observation screens. They wove through hulls of battery fire from the Crimson Eerie's point defense turrets and Tyranny Incarnate's guns, strafing the Red Corsairs' docked vessels before peeling away again. Pulling away from the Crimson Eerie, 5 of Huron's heavily armed vessels surged after the Xenos void ships. Having reached the shadow of the largest planet, Flame of Asuyan and Jade Chris entered its gravity well and utilized its pull to slingshot themselves towards the now unguarded Void Station. Yriel was confident the Red Corsairs' shipmasters would realize the deception soon, but the Eldritch Raiders had bought themselves time to recover the plundered riches and liberate the Aeldari captives. Swiveling gun batteries mounted on the station's hull turned to engage the approaching Aeldari vessels. However, most of their fire went wide, with their targets scrambled by the dragon ship's hollow fields. In return, the Anrathi vessel's pulsar lancers blasted rents into the Crimson Eerie's outer hull. Gouts of vented atmosphere spewed into the void as clouds of frozen crystals, along with torn debris and blackened corpses. Slowing sharply, Flame of Asuyan and Jade Chris swept low over the station's mass. From open hatches and hangars, a cloud of boarding vessels and winged infantry descended into the breaches in the station's skin as vampire raiders swarmed overhead, eliminating point defense batteries one by one. With Prince Yriel at the fore, the Eldritch Raiders cut a swathe through stunned renegade armsmen and mutant thralls, blasting their way into the interior of the Crimson Eerie in a dazzling display of firepower and blade work. Initial progress was swift. Squads of Void Reavers outmatched the station's defenders with superior agility and reckless aggression. Cutting their way into storage vaults and dungeon cells, the raiders slaughtered those who opposed them as they worked their way into the station's vault. They cut free dozens of Alatokai prisoners, extracting the captives to waiting dropships. With Karseth at their side, Yriel and his void-scarred elite cut a path to the station's deepest depths, the Ethermancer senses aiding them in the recovery of a trove of stolen Asuryani artifacts, from power blades and other weapons to sacks filled to the brim with spirit stones pulled from corpses. Starfang skimmers roared through the Crimson Eerie's cargo hangars and embarkation decks, suppressing foes with bursts from their disintegrated cannons and masking their allies' progress with clouds of eldritch mist. The sheer momentum of the assault prevented the station's renegade crew from mounting an effective defense. Only when handfuls of Red Corsair warriors entered the fight did the Anrathi assault falter. The transhuman renegades stemmed the advance with punishing fusillades of bolt gun fire and scythed down lightly armored Aeldari with roaring chain weapons. Yriel alone matched them in battle. The Spear of Twilight was a blur in his hands, finding gaps in power armor, piercing hearts and striking heads from shoulders. However, even as the High Admiral held his own, his bodyguards were struck down. His raiders had recovered a portion of the plundered Alatokai treasures and liberated dozens of prisoners. More certainly remained, but the High Admiral knew he could stay no longer. The time had long passed to withdraw. Scrambling for waiting wave serpents, vampire raiders and other transport craft, the Anrathi beat a fighting retreat, pausing only to collect the spirit stones of the fallen. The Tyrant's Revenge. Mere moments after Yriel's Corsairs boarded the Crimson Eerie, its complement of sorcerers and enslaved Psyker thralls began a chorus of astropathic cries of alarm that cut through Empiric disturbances to reach the bridge of Tyranny Incarnate. When he heard these howled screams of distress, Huron Blackheart realized his error. Though the guns of his void ships had inflicted heavy damage on the smaller Aeldari vessels, the Crimson Eerie was now aflame, and the crews of the larger dragon ships were scrambling for their ships in preparation to withdraw. Without pausing, he ordered all 5 cruisers to turn hard about and drive towards the static Aeldari craft. With their crews still scrambling back aboard, their dragon ships were now vulnerable. Huron had been outmaneuvered, but victory remained within his grasp. Flame of Asuryani began to peel away. Jade Chris, however, was still stationary in the void, as Tyranny Incarnate and its companion vessels thundered forwards, the last straggling Aeldari dropships rising to enter the open hangar bays. Directing the remainder of his vessels to pursue Flame of Asuryani, Huron ordered Tyranny Incarnate's crew to turn hard starboard. The strike cruiser pulled parallel to the Aeldari ship and unleashed a punishing broadside, swiftly followed by a volley of boarding torpedoes laden with raiders. Fighter craft dueled in the twilit void. A handful of the torpedoes were struck, split asunder by laser flurries, and spilt their cargo of warriors into the void. Others smashed into Jade Chris's port side and chewed their way into its innards. Raiders spilled forth, engaging the Xenos crew in battles across burning decks. With the fight raging through Jade Chris's innards, Huron bade Tyranny Incarnate move closer to the stricken dragon ship, arcing around to target its engines. Tyranny Incarnate's gun walls flared again, plasma carronades tearing through the Aeldari vessel's solar sails and thrusters. Explosions rippled across its stern. Huron's flagship circled the stern again, paralleling the floundering dragon ship to fire a further broadside. This time, a volley of adamantine-tipped harpoons erupted from the flanks of the renegade strike cruiser, biting deep into the wraithbone-reinforced armor of Jade Cress. Aboard Tyranny Incarnate, leashed captives and lobotomized servitors, all laboring under the lash, turned towering capstans, pulling harpoon chains tight. The Aeldari vessel was caught fast. The unwrathy crew of Jade Cress now faced the combined might of dozens of Huron Blackheart's transhuman renegades, with no route of retreat apparent. Inch by bloody inch, the Red Corsairs butchered their way towards the bridge. Resistance stiffened there. The dragon ship's Baron and his void-scarred bodyguard turned back repeated assaults. Huron Blackheart determined that the time had come to intercede personally. His sorcerers gathered upon Tyranny Incarnate's command deck and wove a blood-drenched ritual, harnessing the rampant warp tides of the Maelstrom to open a rent in real space. The Tyrant strode through the yawning portal, spanning the gulf between his vessel and that of the enemy on a wave of empiric desolation. Though the energies that swept over him during those brief steps would have killed a lesser being, his unquenchable hatred and the Hamadrya's presence shielded him from its most lethal effects. The Empiric surged, passed straight through the hull, wards, and wraithbone frame of the Aeldari ship. Those Eldritch raiders caught in its path felt the full weight of its impact and dropped to their knees. Blood streamed from their eyes, ears, and nostrils as they clutched their throbbing skulls. As the wave of fury dissipated, Huron Blackheart emerged from its sulphur trails, his horrific flesh and metal visage illuminated by lingering embers of warp fire that clung to his tattered cloak and singed his pallid skin. The Blood Reaver's arrival was met with a roar of triumph by the Red Corsairs. Huron strode towards the vessel's bridge, cleaving a bloody path through all that stood before him. Void-scarred fought as well as they could, but none matched the Tyrant's might. Last to fall was Jade Cress's Baron, snatched up in the Tyrant's claw and immolated before the eyes of his surviving warriors. The act of savagery brought to an end any meaningful resistance. All that remained was to cleanse and plunder the Xenos ship. Huron Blackheart had inflicted a great loss upon his foes and achieved a measure of vengeance, but it was far from enough to satisfy him. The Aeldari had embarrassed him in his own domain. Such an insult could only be answered in bloodshed. As the remainder of the Aeldari fleet disappeared into the deep void, he swore that there would be a reckoning. Sooner or later, he would find Flame of Ascion, and when he did, its crew would know true suffering. Aboard his flagship, Yriel gritted his teeth, observing the stricken Jade Cress as it listed in the void. The recovery of Alatok survivors and Aeldari relics, and plundering the Red Corsairs' void fortress was a success, but he could manage little cheer. He momentarily considered turning about and coming to the vessel's aid, but swiftly discounted the possibility. He could not risk a protracted engagement with the enemy and the loss of his flagship. The destruction of Jade Cress was a heavier price than he had expected to pay. He hoped it was worth it. End quote. If you enjoyed this presentation, then please do pick up a copy of The Lair of the Tyrant. There's quite a lot of fun stuff in there. And secondly, of course, like, subscribe, share, and tip, if I have indeed earned your bounty. But most importantly of all, as always, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.